few months back, I decided to revisit Middle-earth Shadow of War, a game that was one of my favorites back when it was released initially in 2017. It was something I'd consider to be almost everything you'd want out of a sequel. More of its great addictive combat, a deeper, more fleshed out version of the Nemesis system. Arguably, the core pillar of these games is how it stands out from the rest of the open world games that we've become all too familiar with. And while the game itself is great and one I'd recommend to this day without a second thought, its initial reception was ruined by the greed of Warner Brothers with a heavy-handed implementation of loot boxes. Thankfully, those have since been removed, but after going back and playing that game, I found myself wanting to go even further and revisit Shadow of Mordor, the first entry in the series that, even though it takes a much simpler approach to the Nemesis system and frankly its progression system, it's something that's much more relaxing to play, and at times a lot more enjoyable. Now, like I did back with Shadow of War, I kind of want to start this with the weaker aspect, the story. The story of Mordor is one of deception and revenge, and I should say there's going to be some heavy spoilers, so while the story isn't the main pull of these games, as that is more so the Nemesis and combat system, I'd imagine some would like to experience the story for themselves. So if you're one who wants to just do that on your own time, go ahead and skip to this timestamp on the screen, or, feel free to click off the video. But you play as Talion, a ranger from Gondor responsible for guarding the Black Gate of Mordor, and the game starts up with a small skirmish between Talion and his son, introducing the player to basic combat that's extremely similar to Rocksteady's Batman games in style and feel. It's damn near the exact same. The only real difference is, instead of handing out concussions and snapping limbs in half, you're straight up decapitating orcs. There's also a stealth system in this game that has a pretty damn cute tutorial, and introduces you to it by sneaking up and kissing your wife. But in the middle of this, the game is jumping back and forth from the past to present, going from Talion's skirmish with his son, teaching him how to fight and defend himself, to the two of them fighting side by side, defending the gate from Sauron's armies. Talion and his family eventually end up becoming overwhelmed, and all three of them are ritually sacrificed, only for Talion to come back to life thanks to a wraith that, well, I'll let him explain.
You are banished from death, cast adrift between the worlds of light and dark. Curse binds us together within the walls of Mordor.
If what you say is true, then how do we break this curse?
We find the one who cast it on us, the Black Hand of Sauron.
With Talion being resurrected from death and the Wraith wanting his own personal revenge on Sauron, the two of them set out on systematically dismantling the armies in the area by targeting specific enemy captains, making their way up the war chiefs themselves. War chiefs essentially are stronger Uruks that run the quote-unquote strongholds of this game, which are just a little more heavily guarded outposts more than anything. Through the game's course, you'll run into Golem, who brings Talion and the Wraith to artifacts from the Wraith's past, and upon touching said items, they reignite the Wraith's memory and slowly get him stronger as he starts to remember who the hell he actually was before his death. It's through these flashbacks he slowly starts gaining new abilities like the power of dominating Uruks and making them fight for him. It's also from these artifacts that you learn that the Wraith is none other than Celebrimbor, the one responsible for forging the Rings of Power, and he's able to recall how Sauron tricked him into not only forging the rings, but ultimately pushing him over the edge by killing his wife and daughter. Meanwhile, Talion allies himself with Hirgon and Lithrael. Hirgon is a ranger deserter leading a band of Gondorian outcasts, while Lithrael is the daughter of Queen Marin, a warrior herself, seeking out Talion's help with both taking back the Sea of Nirn and freeing her mom, who's under a spell by the wizard Saruman. The story is pretty straightforward, more or less, and it's more of a means to serve the real bread and butter here, that being the combat and Nemesis system. So while it's not as in-depth as some would like it, it still serves its purpose, with one of its biggest flaws, honestly in my opinion, being the final boss fight. The game ends with a quick time event against the Tower, the game's main antagonist, and this is the entire fight and how the story ends. Why games like this at the time thought it was a good idea to end their story with quick time events is something I will never understand. I mean, it's incredibly underwhelming, but the story itself is relatively short, with only 20 missions long, the longest part of which are the moments where you have to dominate or take control of the war chiefs in the two areas of the game, and that is really not long or arduous in of itself. The only thing really is that it's easy to get lost into this game's combat, since you're tasked with essentially fighting the war chiefs, and the war chiefs can have anywhere from 1 to 3 bodyguards, and while you can take on the war chief with their bodyguards there, it's much easier and often better to just find yourself a worm, which is a weaker Uruk that has intel on the captains and war chiefs, giving you insight to their strengths and weaknesses and combat abilities, as well as where to find them. So if you're being smart and want to make it much easier in terms of taking out the war chief, then you just start hunting down their bodyguards, and it's easy to get lost in constantly hunting down the captains, not just because it's fun and addictive, as well as an integral part Part 2, the core fundamentals of this game, but because the progression system is also tied to it. The skill tree in this game is what I say to be pretty basic. You have one tied to Ranger, one tied to Wraith, with some of the stronger abilities tied to the story, essentially forcing you to play more and more of the campaign in order to unlock more of those stronger abilities. You also get basic XP from killing Uruks, providing executions, killing captains, war chiefs. Stronger Uruks give you much more experience, and then you have power points. This is really the XP you're going to find yourself grinding out more of, as power points are tied more to completing Nemesis missions. And Nemesis missions could be duels between two captains. You can initiate a betrayal mission, which is essentially where you dominate a bodyguard or one of the war chiefs. Now you have a man on the inside, and you can initiate a mission where that bodyguard that you dominated can now betray the war chief and essentially backstab him. And while I would consider the progression system in this game to be pretty basic and the power XP to be the most grindy, what I do really like about this game is as you start off, you're relatively weak in terms of your maximum health, your maximum focus. Two things that can actually be increased by earning another form of currency. A currency that is actually earned through side content, completing freedom missions or other challenges tied to stealth missions, tied to freeing humans that are enslaved by the Uruks, or basic combat missions like executing or killing 50 Uruks in the middle of a mosh pit. And something that I've really come to appreciate in this game is whether you're taking on these Nemesis missions, whether you're dealing with the main story or you're dealing with one of the side content levels when it comes to bow challenges, sword challenges, stealth challenges. At the end of the day, all of this stuff is contributing to this power fantasy. You're starting off incredibly weak, or the bare minimum, absolute basics, and then as you get stronger and go through your journey of completely emaciating all of these Uruks, eventually once you get to the end of the story, you're damn near invincible. You can eventually unlock abilities that give you 20 seconds of infinite executions or 20 seconds of infinite shadow strikes. When you kill captains and war chiefs, they drop runes that can also contribute to extending that period of time, or based off your combo meter, you can actually get your sword to light on fire. It's not an incredibly challenging game, it's just one of those games that you can completely zone out and go on an absolute murder spree. In Shadow of Mordor, as well as Shadow of War, the bundle on Steam is almost always on sale. I'd highly recommend you check both these games out. I'm hoping that with the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, we end up eventually getting some type of update that'll boost the frame rate on at least Shadow of War. To be honest, I kind of doubt that's ever going to happen, but I'm optimistic. I hope we can see that sometime soon. Let me know what you guys think. Have you guys ever played Shadow of Mordor? If you guys played both of them, which one do you prefer more? Honestly, I prefer the combat flow of Mordor a little bit more, but I really do love the chaos and absolute madness of the sequel. If they manage to bring those fortresses over into Shadow of Mordor, and you get that massive Uruk on Uruk battle in this game, I think this one, hands down, would be the superior one. Strictly in terms of combat, obviously the Nemesis system in the sequel is hard to beat, but like always, my name is Cynic. Thank you all so much for watching, and a big heartfelt thank you if you stood all the way to the end. But until next time, I'll see you all later.